Right now, thousands of airplanes are landing on a runway that seems to disappear into the ocean. From the cockpit, the approach looks surreal. The concrete stretches forward, and then suddenly it meets nothing but water on both sides. It feels as if the runway was carved straight into the sea itself. This is Hong Kong International Airport, one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever attempted. It cost nearly $20 billion to build. Entire mountains were cut down. 2 islands were reshaped, and more than 9 square kilometers of artificial land were created just so airplanes could land safely. But none of this existed before the 1990s. Because for decades, Hong Kong's main airport sat somewhere far more dangerous. Right in the middle of the city, the old airport was called Kai Tak, and landing there was considered one of the most difficult approaches in the world. Instead of long, open stretches of land, the runway was surrounded by dense urban neighborhoods and towering apartment buildings. Pilots approaching the airport had to perform a famous maneuver known as the Kai Tak Checkerboard Turn. At the last moment before landing, aircraft would bank sharply to line up with the runway, flying frighteningly close to buildings packed with residents. Passengers sitting near the windows could see laundry hanging from balconies, sometimes only meters away. It was dramatic, it was iconic, and it was completely unsustainable. By the 1980s, Hong Kong had become one of Asia's busiest aviation hubs. Air traffic was growing rapidly, but Kai Tak simply had no room to expand. The runway extended into Victoria Harbor, leaving no space for additional infrastructure. Noise complaints were constant, night operations were limited, and the airport was operating dangerously close to its maximum capacity. Hong Kong needed a new airport, but the city had a problem. There was nowhere left to build one. The solution would require something radical. Instead of squeezing another airport into the city, planners proposed moving it out into the sea, far away from crowded neighborhoods, far away from skyscrapers, and far enough from the city to allow runways to operate safely, day and night. But building an airport in the ocean would require something unprecedented. Engineers would need to create an entirely new island. After years of study, planners selected a site northwest of Hong Kong Island. 2 small mountainous islands sat there, Chek Lap Kok and Lam Chau. At first glance, they looked completely unsuitable. The terrain was steep, uneven, and surrounded by deep coastal waters. But engineers saw something different. Those mountains could become the raw material needed to build the airport itself. Instead of importing all the construction fill, they would simply cut the tops off the islands. Entire mountains would be excavated. The earth removed from those peaks would then be used to expand the surrounding land outward into the ocean. It was a plan on a scale rarely attempted before. And once construction began, the transformation was astonishing. Bulldozers, blasting crews, and excavation machines worked continuously, stripping away massive sections of the islands. What had once been rugged mountain slopes slowly flattened into broad plateaus. In total, more than 300 million cubic meters of rock and soil were moved during construction. To visualize that amount, imagine digging up a mountain and spreading it across the sea until it forms a new city-sized island. The material removed from Chek Lap Kok and Lam Chau was transported outward, dumped into the surrounding waters, and compacted into layers. Meanwhile, engineers built massive seawalls around the perimeter to hold everything in place. These barriers, made of giant rock blocks and reinforced concrete, protected the new land from waves, tides, and powerful typhoons that regularly sweep through the region. Slowly, the 2 separate islands began merging together. Water disappeared beneath expanding fields of reclaimed land, and what had once been scattered mountain peaks started to resemble something entirely new. A massive artificial island emerging from the sea. But building the land itself was only the beginning, because the ocean floor beneath Hong Kong's coastal waters posed another challenge. Beneath the new island lay thick layers of soft marine sediment, unstable soil that could compress under enormous weight, and the airport would be heavy. 2 giant runways, one of the largest passenger terminals ever built. Roads, railways, cargo facilities, fuel systems, and air traffic infrastructure, all sitting on reclaimed ground. If the soil compressed unevenly, the runways could sink, crack, or tilt over time. A catastrophic problem for aircraft operations. So engineers launched an enormous stabilization effort, Before the airport structures could even begin rising above the ground, the soil below had to be strengthened. Special vertical drains were inserted deep into the seabed, allowing trapped water within the clay to escape. Heavy loads were placed temporarily across the island to compress the ground gradually and speed up settlement. In other words, engineers forced the soil to settle early, before the airport opened. It was a slow and meticulous process, but it worked. By the mid-1990s, the island had grown large enough to begin constructing the airport itself. Massive runways were laid out across the reclaimed land. Each runway stretched nearly 4 kilometers long enough to handle the world's largest passenger jets. From above, they created a striking visual effect. The strips of concrete extended across the artificial island, surrounded by open ocean on both sides. To pilots approaching from the sky, it looked almost as if the runway simply vanished into the sea. And soon that disappearing runway would replace one of the most dangerous airports on Earth. But completing the island was only part of the challenge, because connecting this new airport to Hong Kong's dense urban center would require building one of the largest transportation networks the city had ever seen. By the mid-1990s, the artificial island at Checkerboard Turn had finally taken shape. Where there had once been 2 rugged islands and open ocean, engineers had created a massive new platform of reclaimed land stretching out into the South China Sea. But an airport sitting miles offshore can't function in isolation. Planes might be able to land there, but millions of passengers still needed a way to reach it. And solving that problem meant building something almost as ambitious as the airport itself. The project became known as the Airport Core Program. Instead of constructing only an airport, Hong Kong decided to redesign its entire transportation network around the new facility. Highways, bridges, railways, and tunnels would connect the artificial island directly to the city. The scale of the infrastructure was enormous. New expressways were carved across Lantau Island. Rail lines were built to link downtown Hong Kong to the airport in under 25 minutes. Entire sections of coastline were reshaped to make room for the expanding transport system. One of the most impressive pieces of this network was the Qingma Bridge. Stretching more than 2 kilometers across the water, it became one of the longest suspension bridges in the world, capable of carrying both road traffic and railway lines. On its upper deck, cars and trucks travel toward the airport. Inside the lower enclosed deck, trains race across the bay, shielded from the powerful winds that frequently sweep through the region. The bridge alone became an engineering landmark, but it was just one link in a massive chain designed to deliver passengers to the new airport island. Meanwhile, construction crews continued shaping the airport itself. The runways were among the most important components. Each runway stretched approximately 3,800 meters, long enough to accommodate large international aircraft arriving from across the globe. But building these runways on reclaimed land required extreme precision. Layers of crushed rock, gravel, and specially engineered pavement were placed carefully over the stabilized soil. Every section had to remain perfectly level to ensure safe takeoffs and landings. Survey teams constantly monitored the ground beneath the runways, watching for any signs of uneven settlement. Even small shifts could create dangerous conditions for aircraft. But thanks to years of ground preparation, the reclaimed island held firm. And from the air, the effect was striking. Approaching pilots would see a narrow strip of land stretching across the water. Runways extending so far toward the horizon that they seemed to fade into the ocean itself. It looked almost unreal, an airport floating between sea and sky. At the heart of the island stood the airport's most recognizable structure, the passenger terminal. Designed by renowned architect Norman Foster, the terminal building was conceived as a vast open space capable of handling enormous passenger volumes. Its sweeping roof curves across the structure like a series of wings, supported by long rows of steel columns. Natural light floods the interior through massive glass walls, giving travelers views of the surrounding sea and mountains beyond. When it opened, the terminal instantly became one of the largest airport buildings in the world. Inside, passengers could move through expansive halls, automated walkways, and high-speed train connections linking different sections of the airport. Everything was designed for efficiency, because Hong Kong expected this airport to handle tens of millions of passengers every year. Finally, after nearly a decade of construction, the moment arrived. On July the 6th, 1998, Hong Kong officially opened its new international airport. At the same time, the legendary Kai Tak Airport closed forever. Aircraft that once performed the dramatic checkerboard turn over crowded city streets would now approach wide-open skies over the sea. The change was immediate. Hong Kong suddenly had one of the most advanced aviation hubs in the world. Cargo operations expanded rapidly. Passenger traffic surged. Airlines from every continent began routing flights through the new facility. The artificial island had become a global gateway. But like any massive engineering project, the airport's early days were not completely smooth. Opening day was marked by technical glitches that affected baggage systems and cargo operations. Some flights experienced delays as the brand new systems were pushed to their limits. Critics questioned whether the enormous investment had been rushed. Yet within months, most of the issues were resolved, and the airport began operating at full capacity. Today, Hong Kong International Airport stands as one of the busiest airports on Earth. Every year, tens of millions of passengers pass through its terminals. Cargo shipments flow through vast logistics centers. Aircraft arrive and depart from nearly every corner of the planet. Few travelers realize that the ground beneath them was once open ocean, or that two mountains were flattened to create the land they stand on, or that an entire transportation network, bridges, tunnels, railways, and highways, was built just to connect this island to the city. From above, the runways still stretch outward across the water, appearing almost to vanish into the horizon. A reminder that the airport itself exists only because engineers dared to reshape the landscape. Hong Kong didn't just build a runway, it built an island. And in doing so, it created one of the most extraordinary aviation projects the world has ever seen.